Hello everyone, and welcome to After Alexander. Episode 88. The Bubble Bursts. We left off last time with negotiations between Antiochus III and the Roman Republic having gotten nowhere, with war now being a foregone conclusion. Today, let's watch the beginning of the international fireworks show. Now, despite war being seen as inevitable and being talked of or indeed clamoured for in places like Rome or Ephesus, neither side really wanted a fight. Rome was riding the wave of having defeated both Carthage and Macedon in recent years, which I'll leave slightly to one side as the details of those conquests would be more of a story for a podcast like Autocrat. Regardless, this conflict with Antiochus would be the first time they really dipped their toes into the Middle East. Besides this uncertainty, the East was renowned as a place of splendour and military brilliance. It is easy to imagine the foggy knowledge the Romans had, giving them the impression they were about to go up against an overwhelming odds. Easy to see how that might make you hesitate. On the other side of the Mediterranean, Antiochus III, big surprise here, also felt hesitation. He was reluctant to tangle with the Roman legions, and didn't really want to fight. However, both sides had their positions that they were not going to back down on. On the one hand, the Romans were hell-bent on keeping Greece within the Roman sphere of influence. On the other hand, for his part, Antiochus felt that things he was doing to assume the inheritance of Seleucus were seen by the Romans as warlike actions. Their desires were mutually exclusive, as Bevan reminds us, and so war was the answer. And yet, Edwin Bevan writes that a détente and cohabitation might have been possible if these two were the only players with a stake in the game. Rome might have contented itself with Thrace being taken over by Antiochus if they got control over Greece back. Sort of like an East and West Germany situation, if you will, dividing the two spheres of influence. However, as is often the case, life wasn't that simple. There were others nibbling away at the two sides, pushing them towards violence. Hannibal was pushing on the Seleucid side, seeking revenge for Carthage's humiliating defeat by Rome in the Second Punic War. Over in Pergamon, Eumenes wanted to expand. Finally, the Aetolians wanted to cause problems. So we end up with a gap between the two powers, which extends even into factions in individual Greek cities. Democratically inclined individuals within cities often sided with Antiochus, while the rich preferred Rome. The rich within these cities stood to lose if the new order, Rome rising in the Greek world, was disrupted. By contrast, those less well-off in society could reminisce about the Seleucid monarchy, and all the fantastically wealthy and powerful imagery this conjured up. After all, Antiochus was the Great King, and in this title was a successor to both Xerxes and Alexander the Great. Not only that, but Antiochus III, like his great-great-grandfather Seleucus I before him, had the prestige of the sight of Indian elephants in his army ever since his expedition out east we discussed a few episodes ago. We've seen these elephants in action firsthand at the Battle of Raphia, don't forget. But anyway, let's move away from Bevan's extensive discussion of intra-city politics and towards the bigger picture once again. The Roman ambassadors returned to the Eternal City just after the new consuls had taken office. Now, this warrants an explanation. For those who don't know, the Roman Republic operated under a system where two men, with the office of consul, were in joint charge. They ran the Senate and the military and were elected every year. This way, no one man could ever rule like a tyrant again, unlike the 7 successive kings that had been in charge of Rome before. Yes, there was occasionally a dictator appointed during an emergency, but this was only for a term of 6 months. Now, Wikipedia informs me the names of the consuls for 192 BCE were Lucius Quinctius Flaminius and Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus. This Ahenobarbus is noteworthy because he's the 7th great-grandfather of a man called Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, at least at birth. I say at birth because you might know him better by his adoptive name, Nero. That's right, there's an ancestor of Emperor Nero currently in the picture. But anyway, tangent over, back to the story. The ambassadors told the Senate there was no cause for war as of yet, but that sentiment in favour of it was strengthening. In fact, rumours were starting to fly around, including one courtesy of Prince Attalus, the brother of King Eumenes of Pergamon. Attalus spread word that Antiochus was already in Europe with his armies, and that the Aetolian League were on the point of leaping to his aid. So the Romans took precautions. Early in 192, a Roman fleet had sailed into Greece. Now, armies were placed in Tarentum and Brundisium in southern Italy, able to leap into Greece when and if required. 20 vessels were also sent to Sicily to block an expected Seleucid advance there. The Sicilian governor was told to raise an army and patrol the east coast. By the way, that force in southern Italy didn't stay there long. It was soon moved to Apollonia across the Adriatic Sea. Both sides were also building up their navies. Not that diplomatic avenues weren't still valuable, it's just that they were in preparing for war rather than stopping it. Antiochus was favourable towards the Aetolians, with the leader of the League being used diplomatically by the king himself. This leader came back to Greece in 192 BCE, finding a league where some were still in favour of avoiding war. For their part, the Romans were also not idle in trying to stir the pot. Titus Flaminius, remember, not the consul but the man we've been clinging to for the past few episodes, arrived in Greece with other Romans to try and keep the Greek cities loyal to them. There was already a war going on between Nabis, the king of Sparta, and the Achaean League, but the Romans didn't interfere here. They wanted to keep the Achaeans loyal, and so I guess throwing Nabis to the Achaean League would be throwing them enough of a bone to help achieve this. Titus Flaminius managed to expel the anti-Roman parties in 2 important cities, namely Demetrias and Chalcis. Hold on to those, by the way, we'll be coming back to them later. However, Titus Flaminius ran into a brick wall when it came to the Aetolians themselves. The people believed that Antiochus III was coming, and that he had enough gold with him to buy the city of Rome itself. In this bubbling atmosphere, the League passed a bill which asked Antiochus to free the Greeks. They also asked him to sort out the problems between the Aetolian League and the Romans. As you can see, the gloves are coming off. Titus Flaminius was supposedly absent when this new bill was passed. When he requested a copy from the new leader of the Aetolian League, he was told that he should wait until the Aetolians were on the Tiber's banks for a response. Again, for those who don't know, the Tiber is the river that the city of Rome sits on. A pretty explicit threat. Finally, the Aetolian League had properly broken ties with the Roman Republic. They scrambled to secure key positions ahead of the hoped-for arrival of King Antiochus III. One man was dispatched to bring Chalcis into the fold, while another was sent to Demetrias. See, I told you we'd come back to them later. Sparta was also on their radar. Now, only the mission to Demetrias met with success and allowed an Aetolian force into the city. The pro-Roman faction over in Chalcis repulsed the Aetolians, while the Spartans actually killed the Aetolian force as revenge for the murder of Nabis by the League. And yes, I know this is moving a bit fast, I'm getting diplomatic whiplash as well. The Romans thought about retaking Demetrias, but the city's defences were too strong. Greece was now primed for Antiochus to make his move. For his part, Antiochus himself had been busy. Since war had become inevitable, he'd been taking over the city-states of Anatolia as a precursor to a Greek invasion. He had still not gotten round to the cities of Smyrna or Lampsacus when the Aetolian messenger showed up. Yet again, Antiochus was unsure of what to do. For one thing, he didn't want to head off for the Greek mainland with his rear still unsecured. For another, there was the question of Hannibal. There was now, finally, a new fleet which the Carthaginian general could use to launch an attack on Africa. However, by now, Antiochus III was wary of giving Hannibal any kind of command. So far, Hannibal had been able to keep himself in Antiochus's good books, but by now his talent was causing suspicion in the eyes of the monarch. At this point, the Aetolian messenger injected himself into this situation. He painted a false picture of Greece to the king to try and pressure him to intervene. He basically wanted Antiochus to mass his men in Greece, so you can understand why he's twisting the truth a little bit. By contrast, Hannibal was looking at the bigger picture, seeing the Greek attack as only part of the story. He thought that the main show would be in Italy. However, the Aetolian messenger won the day. Bevan writes that the quote, well-considered unquote, strategy of fighting in the west of the Mediterranean was abandoned, and Hannibal became nothing more than an ignored man at court. Antiochus now finally turned his thoughts towards Greece. The Aetolian League's capture of Demetrias gave him a window of opportunity. So Antiochus travelled to Ilium for a sacrifice to Athena, paralleling both Xerxes and Alexander at the start of their respective journeys west and east. He travelled to Ephesus late in the year and set out with 200 transport ships and 100 warships. The Seleucids landed somewhere called Pteleum and received a warm welcome. Antiochus III was in Greece. Next time, we will continue the war, and see how Antiochus fares in a territory no Seleucid has ever ruled properly, the Greek mainland itself. Until then, thank you all for listening. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to get in touch at the show's email address. Until next time, have a great week, everyone.